It is hard to convince people. Even on something as easy as where to go to lunch, it is hard to convince somebody if they already have their mind made up. If you start thinking about getting somebody to change their entire lifestyle or deeply held beliefs, you have a much, much bigger job ahead of you. I've had a front row seat for many years watching my brother convince 500 Peruvian cacao farm families to do business with us and to plant more of a certain type of cacao rather than other available crops. This has provided me with some extremely valuable lessons. Too many of us think that we'll be able to convince somebody of something after a single conversation. Or we think we can forward one article to somebody that we believe lays out an ironclad case for why we are right and they are wrong. But that just is not how it works. Convincing is a labor of love, love being the operative word here. Some time ago, I read a definition of love that I liked quite a lot. The definition said that when you love somebody, you are willing to sacrifice whatever is necessary to help that person reach their spiritual potential. In this context, spiritual didn't have religious connotation. It meant that you will do whatever it takes to help a person be the best version of themselves possible. That is obviously a much higher standard than most people are willing to live up to. And it doesn't mean that when you love somebody, it is always sunshine and gumdrops. Sometimes the circumstances will require encouragement and positivity. Other times, to help somebody, you have to have hard conversations, telling them that their mode of action isn't serving them. Of course, to truly be loved by somebody implies the inverse. You have to be willing to be molded by those who love you, and from time to time, you will have to accept hard teaching. Whatever the case may be, whether you're coming from a place of love or not, people tend to vastly underestimate the time and effort necessary to get somebody to change their mind. We also tend to vastly overestimate how much impact our favorite selling point will have on a person. What may seem super cut and dried and obvious and a deal closer to you might mean very little to your audience. Here are some of the lessons we've learned over the years about convincing people. These lessons are taken mostly from my brother Brian's more than a decade living in the Peruvian jungle with cacao farmers. To set the stage just a bit more, when we showed up in Campo, we were not asked to come in and start a project. The project was our idea, not theirs. The folks in this part of the jungle had met very few foreigners before we came to town. But the foreigners they had met were mostly not for profit types who made big promises but didn't actually have the funding to carry them out. Therefore, we were fighting against a predisposition which caused these folks not to trust us at all. Further, all of these farmers already had buyers who they were selling their cacao to. To cut ties with those people and go with us implied a huge risk, because if we didn't have the money or staying power necessary, they were exposing themselves to terrible economic consequences. Another big risk is that it takes 2 to 3 years for a cacao tree to produce an economic benefit. Early on, we started a clone garden and gave away baby Pure Nacional cacao trees to those interested in increasing their production of Pure Nacional. But Pure Nacional is slightly less productive than modern hybrid cacao trees, and also it is slightly less disease resistant. The only reason to plant it from an economic standpoint is if you are sure you're going to get a price premium for planting a fine flavored cacao tree. Also, planting cacao competes with all of the other crops that a farmer might plant. For example, coffee, rice, bananas, etc. Other options are to use the land to raise cattle or fish. These are all of the barriers that had to be overcome if we were to get enough farmers into the project to build a viable business. It has taken us 15 years to convince 500 farm families to sell to us. It took us many, many years just to get to 50. Here are some of the lessons. First, actions speak so much louder than words. You can make all the promises you want, but doing what you said you would do day in and day out for long stretches of time makes a much bigger impact. In our case, we didn't wait until we had enough farmers in the project to build our cacao processing facility. We just went ahead and built it. We promised the cacao farmers that we would take over centralized cacao fermenting and drying so they wouldn't have to worry about it. That was easy to say. But once they see you hiring workers in town and actually building a monument to your promise, it is much more convincing than hundreds of speeches and conversations. Second, keep going for as long as it takes. If you really care, make a decision to keep going until you get what you are after. Year after year after year, people didn't want to buy into what we were trying to accomplish. They kept thinking that next year would be the year we'd finally disappear. If you keep coming back with the same message and the same attitude, then eventually you become undeniable. In our case, my brother became an undeniable member of the community. He was at all of the Cacao Association meetings. He built a team of well-known folks in town. He showed up on farm after farm after farm to buy cacao. He did this for years before getting significant buy-in. But that is what it takes. Third, fit your system into the existing system. This is where my brother Brian is an absolute genius. We knew what we wanted to accomplish, and we knew that it would require big changes on the part of our partners. Instead of insisting on an entire overhaul of the way they were doing things, Brian did his best to leave as many things as possible exactly how they always were. Fitting ourselves into the lives of our partners without them having to make too many changes was very helpful. For example, we did our best to show up and buy cacao on the days when the cacao farmers were already accustomed to harvesting and selling cacao, instead of imposing a whole new schedule. Fourth, hammer home the benefits to your audience hard. Cacao farmers can't afford to be too idealistic most of the time. They have to be extremely pragmatic. When you live in a remote area and you earn your living off the land, and you are at the mercy of weather and swings in world commodity prices, you have to make hard-nosed decisions. Coming in and talking about how we were going to transform an industry or take the chocolate world by storm would have been non-starters. They would have meant nothing to the people out there in Campo. Instead, Brian focused on the economic benefit, the time savings, and how much easier it would be to do business with us because of our consistency and professionalism compared to other buyers. Those are real, obvious, tangible improvements that are easy to get your head around. And finally, fifth, you should actually care about the person you are trying to convince. This led to so many heated discussions between my dad, my brother, and I. In the beginning, we were watching a lot of money fly out the door, and not much was finding its way back in. But my brother absolutely would not budge on doing right by our cacao farm partners, no matter how much it cost. This meant loaning money to cacao farmers at no interest against future bean sales to cover unexpected medical expenses. It meant outright footing the bill for a lot of families who would never have enough money to make certain ends meet. It meant investing in extra workers on our payroll to make it easier and easier over time for cacao farmers to get their cacao into our system. Brian insisted on this not for cynical reasons. He wasn't trying to trick these people into liking us so they would do business with us and we can make money. He was doing it because it was the right thing to do. Brian is the godfather to several cacao farm children. There are kids right now in Campo named after Brian. These people are our friends, not pieces on a chessboard. And like most things in life, when your intentions are pure, the results will be better. This is especially true when it comes to convincing people.